So thanks for having me back. The last time I talked to this group, I think I talked about peripheral nerve stuff. So today is the switch over to the central nervous system. And that's actually where I sort of live professionally. I actually am a central nervous system neurologist, and I've been doing this job for 40 years. So I know a lot of stuff about this. So what I'm going to do tonight is give you a quick overview of what we talk about when we talk about aging and brain. And especially when we talk about it in terms of HIV. So, the PowerPoint. You lost your PowerPoint? Don't bring it back. I can talk all night without it. I do this all day. It's what I do. I talk about brain stuff all day long. So, there we go. There you go. So, what I'm going to do is move through the slide materials relatively quickly so that there'll be lots of time for people to ask questions, because I think for me and for audiences, that's the most interesting part of presentations. I love to see what people want to know, and it puts me on the spot to try to figure out if I know the answer. So I learned from it. It's kind of nice. Is it the up or down or the left or right? Left or right. So there is my place where I live, brain. Relatively amazing organ that unfortunately is connected to the human body, so it ages like everything else. All of the brain ages, all parts, but for most of us, the concern is that big cerebral cortex, because that's where we have all of our higher level of functions, language, vision, calculation, all of that, memory stores. And there are four ways that brains age. They atrophy, which means they lose tissue bulk. They have apoptosis, which is a very fancy way of saying that every cell in the brain is like a milk carton. It's got an expiration date on there. When it hits that expiration date, the cell will die. And so that's an interesting issue. The third issue for aging is inflammation in the brain. And just like inflammation is bad in our joints and every place else in our gut, everywhere else in our body, brains don't like inflammation either. And that is a process of aging. And lastly, we have accumulation of proteins that are dysfunctional. We have amyloid protein, and then we have tau protein. So we have lots of different mechanisms for aging in the brain. The atrophy can be global, and atrophy could also be focal. It could be lateralized to one little area, particularly mesial temporal lobes for Alzheimer's disease and hippocampal structures for some other neurodegenerative diseases. Anyone want to guess when atrophy or shrinkage of brain material begins in the human life cycle?
21.
21. Good, very good. Very good guess. Actual technical answer is between 17 and 18, but that's a good crowd. So we have atrophy. Now, the apoptosis, again, is the milk carton thing. But this programmed cell death, a lot of it's genetic, but the process is sometimes acquired. So we have to try to figure out what's in the environment that would speed up this programmed cell death. So these cells are dying before their time. The neuroinflammation, again, it can be throughout the whole brain. It can be generalized, or it could just be focal in a small area. But mostly the inflammation is because of the supporting cells of the brain. The actual brain cells that do the work of the brain are the neurons. But the brain has multitude of other types of cells that are the support structure to hold everything together. And that's really where the inflammation comes in. Those cells are called astrocytes, glia, microglia, macrophages, and those are troublemakers when they get sick because they lead to inflammation. Our brains are very, very tightly separated from blood supply. So brains do not let anything in that just wants to come in. And that blood-brain barrier is maintained by these supporting types of cells. This blood-brain barrier is a great thing because it protects our brains from constantly being toxified. But on the other hand, in our department, where I work, it can be problematic because we can't get chemotherapy in there to kill brain tumors because the blood-brain barrier will just block that from happening. So the blood-brain barrier is one area that we can get inflammation if it breaks down. Molecular size is another area. If we have a very, very big particle, it's not going to get into brain to help fix things up. like chemotherapy. For HIV patients, damaged viral particles can be a problem. It's not necessarily intact HIV viral elements, but damaged elements. And then lastly, those supportive cells, the astrocytes, may be dysfunctional. So here we have a very nice brain. Brains up here, blood's down here, brain cells are here, and then you have the other supporting structures that make that tight blood-brain barrier so nothing gets through. So the other two items for aging, amyloid and tau protein. Amyloid is cleaved as a normal brain protein. However, as we age, we all drop a little bit of beta amyloid into our brain. That's okay. However, in pathology, such as Alzheimer's disease, there's an excessive amount of beta amyloid. So the amyloid plaque that we talk about is actually not in the cells, it's around the cells. So it blocks the cells from talking to each other. So you're not going to get a memory trace to go from short-term to long-term storage because the amyloid plaque is in the way. Now, there are two types of amyloid. There's an amyloid beta 40 and a 42. The 42 is the bad stuff. The 40 is the good stuff. So one of the ways we can tell whether the brain is aging in a normal fashion is do a ratio of 42 to 40. So if that ratio is too low, then we've got too much bad amyloid and not enough good amyloid. That's a concern. And you can see these amyloid plaques in yellow there. They're outside the cells, but they're blocking transmission. So it's like you took your phone wires and did this, but it's just not going to work well for you. The last thing is nowadays we have PET scanning to look at amyloid. So this is a nice normal degree of beta amyloid deposition. That's an excessive amount. So the one on that side is the Alzheimer's brain. And the one on this side is actually a normal aging brain. So even though the normal aging brain has some amyloid, it doesn't have nearly the amount that you see with Alzheimer's disease. So the last protein that is dysfunctional is tau protein. It causes neurofibrillary tangles. It is not like amyloid. It is not outside the cells. It actually clumps inside the cells. So it causes brain cell death by a different mechanism. And neurodegenerative diseases often have too much tau protein, particularly diseases like frontotemporal dementia, Hicks disease, Lewy body disease, all those beautiful things. And you can see here that amyloid plaque is outside those blue brain cells, but the neurofibrillary tangles are sitting inside the cells. So there are two different types of dysfunctional proteins as we age. So here's the exciting news, okay? In 2024, the FDA finally approved the use of blood biomarkers to measure all of these proteins. We have been using these proteins in research trials for years and years and years. And for many years, we had to pull them from spinal fluid. And most people don't sign up for spinal taps very easily, but they will stick out their arm for a needle. So it's been phenomenal, and even more phenomenal, unbelievable actually in today's political environment. Medicare agreed to pay for this starting in 2025. So people can come to the office now, and if they have concerns about their aging brain, is it normal aging? Is it pathological aging? We just have to stick out an arm and get some serum biomarkers. So it's very, very exciting. They're blood-based serum, they're rapid, they're reliable, they've been validated, and we're hoping that we can get some more specific for the HIV community for HIV-associated neurological disease. Wouldn't it be nice to have serum biomarkers for that? So we're hopeful. But this has been a very exciting year for brain aging because of this situation. So this is a game changer. So we have multiple biomarkers now. We can do that amyloid 42/40 ratio to see if it's good or bad deposition. We've got phosphorylated tau proteins, both 217 and 181, two different styles of tau. And we can also do this ApoE genetic profile. So I can tell people right away if they're carrying a copy of the Alzheimer's gene, if they're carrying two copies of the Alzheimer's gene, what their risk factor is going to be for developing Alzheimer's over their lifetime. And it's all covered by Medicare now. Yay. Amazing. So look, there's always going to be normal age-related cognitive decline, right? And that's why we teach algebra to 14-year-olds and not to people in the 60s. Okay? I cannot do a differential anymore. Okay, there's going to be some normal aging, but sometimes it's a little bit above normal, and we would consider that mild cognitive impairment. But if it gets into interfering with activities of daily living, so somebody can't remember how to pay bills, we call that a dementia syndrome, okay? But we always have to look for alternatives, because sometimes people come to us and they think they have a cognitive disorder and they really don't. They're over-medicated, they're on too much stuff, they're sick, they're renal failure. There are a million other reasons that people can appear to be dementia and they're not. So we call those people pseudo-dementia because they look like they're demented, but when you actually work them up, they're not. So we have to be careful how to do this. So when we talk about mild cognitive impairment, about 30% of those folks will eventually go on to a dementia diagnosis. So if we can identify mild cognitive impairment, our job is to make sure we're doing everything we can to keep them in mild cognitive impairment and not let them transition further down the freeway into dementia. But again, dementia, implies activities of daily living are impaired, not just memory. It has to be multiple domains, short-term memory, long-term memory, verbal memory, visual memory. So this is where neuropsychologists come in because they help us with that. Now, interesting for the HIV community, although HIV enters the nervous system very early in the course of infection, which is why seroconversion is often associated with meningitis, headaches, Bell's palsy. It does need to get across that blood-brain barrier. So if we could stop this inflammatory process in its tracks, it would be very much harder for the HIV to get across that barrier. But it doesn't go into the neurons. It doesn't go into the brain cells. It never does. HIV attacks the supporting cells, those astrocytes, glia, macrophages. So that gives us an opportunity to understand where we might be able to intervene in that system to prevent further neurological damage. So here's a dirty industry secret. We used to say there was HIV-associated neurocognitive disorder, HAND, okay? Or if it was dementia, we called it HIV-associated dementia, HAD, or AIDS dementia complex. I'll tell you right now, in our department and across the nation, neurologists do not use these terms any longer. We find them discriminatory. They are difficult for patients. They have very impactful impact on people's livelihoods and their self-worth. And it's not necessary. We really understand aging now to be a more global problem, and is not something that we need to target people and say, well, this is an HIV problem. And I'll tell you why. Because these things are disappearing because we have great HIV care now. And we only used to see these problems with CD4s under 200. You're doing treatment earlier now. You're doing treatment that is much more options, So we just don't see this. When I started this, and I've been doing this job for 40 years, when I started this with patients, we did see dementia. We did see those problems. But honestly, we've taken this term away because it's really disappeared. We just don't see a specific issue here because it's very rare for us to see people who have been consistently under 200 T cells. It's very rare for us to see people who have not been on antiviral therapy. Times have changed, and the therapies are better, and there's more options for people. So, little secret for you there. In HIV, there's always concerns for other things that are bothering brain, and this is a list of those things. But to be fair, again, now that I see such great T cell counts and such non-detectable viral loads year in and year out, I haven't had toxoplasmosis, progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, or CMV brain infection probably in about 12 years now. Okay. When I started, I did this day in and day out. Our wards were filled with people who had these alternative problems. It just doesn't happen today in the world where people are getting care. Now, of course, there are areas of this country and there are areas in this world where people don't get care. And I'm sure it's still happening there. And I don't mean to minimize that. But at least here, these have really become extraordinarily rare, extraordinary. So when we talk about bringing in our neuropsychologists, we want to find out about those different domains to find out if there really is dementia. So when you come to our office, you get to play with me for intellectual functioning domain. We get to do mini mental status. We get to do MoCA. I heard that giggling. I know my crowd. For attentional skills, we do digit span, we do rapid set switching. When you sit down with us and we do these tasks, initially people think we're nuts, like, what are you doing? But we're actually looking at these individual cognitive domains to find out if there's a dementia issue. Language, we look at naming and fluency. For visual domain, we look at the ability to do a design copy or construction. So we got lots to do there. For memory, we look at short-term memory, we look at long-term memory, we look at verbal memory, we look at visual memory. We have so many ways to tease out what's going on with brain function. What did I do? Yeah. Okay, it just got tired of me. That's fine. Yeah, I get tired of myself, so it's okay. And so we always want to make sure, though, that we take into account mood and behavior, because mood and behavioral changes are part of cognitive impairment. So we do look for anxiety, depression, sleep deprivation. So neurocognitive impairment, it still happens even in the age of antiretrovirals because of aging, right? As we age, we absorb our medications not quite as well, and we have difficulty with metabolism. So we do still see an issue of aging brains and dealing with chronic illnesses, but it's not just HIV. It's people with renal failure. It's people with cancer. It's people on chemotherapy. As we age, these are issues. So aging today is associated with a lot of major medical comorbidities, cerebrovascular disease, because you don't have to worry about that when you're 25, but when you're 60, you have to worry about cerebrovascular disease like anybody else. We have to worry about neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's. You know, in this world today, Parkinson's is the fastest growing nervous system diagnosis over everything. Faster than Alzheimer's, faster than stroke. Parkinson's disease is an epidemic, and it's particularly here in our beautiful state of California because we are the breadbasket of the world in terms of our San Joaquin Valley. And all of those people are exposed to toxic pesticides, fungicides, and all of our farmers and all of the people who live in those communities have extraordinary rates of Parkinson's, to the point now where the state of California keeps a registry. And so every time that I have a new diagnosis of Parkinson's in the office, we have to report it to the state because they're following these people to try to find out what can we do to try to help. It's a very, very big problem. We are uncertain if having HIV alters the risk of developing Parkinson's or Lewy body disease or Alzheimer's. This talk was really great for me because it gave me an opportunity to sit down for a lot of time, and it was so interesting to go through tons and tons of data and studies. And at the end of the day, the conclusion is we really don't know if living with HIV is necessarily a risk factor for these other issues. The risk factor is probably aging and the toxic environment we live in, because we really live in times where our food supply is really not that clean, sadly. So for neuroprotection, in 2010, they came up with this CPE score for antivirals. This is called the CNS Penetration Effectiveness Score. So it's between 1 and 4, and the higher the number, that imply that the antiretroviral drug got better penetrance into the brain. And that was hopeful that that would help us guide choices of antiretrovirals to prevent HIV-related cognitive decline. But you know what? I looked at this, and there are hundreds of studies, and it absolutely is completely unclear whether these CPE numbers really matter. What really seems to matter is that people get on therapy early in the course of an infection, stay on therapy, and make sure their therapies are keeping their viral loads non-detectable and their T cells over 200. The concept of whether or not this antiviral better than this one because this one gets more into the brain and this one doesn't, it's very unclear, because it's possible that some of the ones that get into the brain with better efficacy may also be wreaking some damage in there because they're too potent. So these CPE scores are fallen somewhat out of favor, except in research. The other problem with all of this research is that when you look at the study subjects, they're not comparable, okay? So you can't compare somebody who never went on antiretrovirals for the first 10 years to people who have been on antiretrovirals since the day one. You can't compare people who became infected at age 16 to people who become infected at 52. The studies, also race, right? Race and gender. I mean, there are probable differences there. And the studies are difficult because some of them use no discretion. They took all comers. Some people only looked at people who were, young. Some people only those who were old. So it's very difficult to look at the literature and decide if this CPE concept is really valid. So we're more interested today in genetics, and now we have the blood test for these genetics. We know that genes play a role in aging. If you've ever seen some of the Hollywood films like Becoming Alice or about Alzheimer's disease, those are generally stories of people who have developed Alzheimer's disease very, very young, in their 40s and 50s. Those people are almost always genetically programmed to develop Alzheimer's disease. They carry a gene called presenilin-1 and presenilin-2. But the older genetics, for people who are older and develop Alzheimer's, those are mostly ApoE genetics, okay? And so ApoE, we all have 2 copies of this gene. It comes in 3 different flavors: chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, 2, 3, and 4, okay? And everybody's get 2 copies, one from mom, one from dad. And here's how it works. Because everybody gets 2 copies, those are your choices. You can be in any of those boxes, right? It's just the way the math works, right? You have 3 different flavors and you got 2 different choices. That's how it's going to look. But the ApoE2 is protective. So if you have an ApoE2 gene, the risk of Alzheimer's disease is much lower. If you have an ApoE4 gene, the risk of Alzheimer's disease is much higher. The ApoE3 gene is neutral. It doesn't seem to matter one way or another. So the winners, the lottery winners, are the ApoE22, right? Those people like lucky ticket winners, right? Very low likelihood. The disaster is when people come to the office and it's ApoE44. One copy of ApoE4 probably increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease 2 to 3-fold. But 2 copies of ApoE4 10 to 15-fold increase. So we really want to make sure that nowadays we have this blood test. So within a week, I can tell you your ApoE status. And I think that's very powerful for people now, especially when they want to talk about long-term care planning. So we talked about this, so we don't need to look at that. But we do need to look at the fact that, as we age, connective tissue of the brain, the white matter, starts to fall apart. And that's another problem for trying to get information from A to B to C, right? You need the freeway to connect, to get off at the right exit. The gray matter is your cortex. Those are brain cells. But the white matter is all of the supportive tissue around it to let information flow from A to B to C to D, right? And there are many risk factors for advancing white matter destruction. HIV is one of them. Hypertension, hyperlipidemia, diabetes, smoking, chronic illness, cancer, renal failure, liver failure, okay? And you can see the white matter we have a very thin cortex of gray matter, but underneath, this is all the white matter, because we fit billions of brain cells into something the size of the white of your thumbnail, okay? But the white matter is like the rest of the thumb, okay? Because it has to sort all that information and take it up to the other fingers. so that the brain can have all the parts communicate. So I'll show you white matter destruction. Here's your white matter. Not so bad. In this person, getting a little thick and patchy there. And in this person, really bad, right? So those are MRI images, and everybody who gets an MRI of the brain, they will comment in the report for you as to the degree of white matter destruction, because the more destruction of white matter, the more likely you're going to have neurocognitive issues. So many people come to me with MRI reports and say, what is this babble about white matter? What is this? It is this. Okay, so we know that by controlling risk factors, that could look better. All right, so let's do quickly, what can we do to prevent aging as much as possible? Because you can't entirely stop the system, right? Like, we're just going to age. That's the way it's going to be. The most important factor that we think works the best is exercise, particularly vigorous aerobic exercise. And the American Academy of Neurology recommends 150 minutes of vigorous aerobic exercise per week in divided sessions, which really isn't that terrible because that would be 30 minutes, 5 days a week. It's a doable goal, but every study that we look at for age-related changes in the brain, this exercise protocol seems to really work. How do we measure normal people's aging? We do an MRI, we measure the white matter. We also measure the amount of atrophy. We see how much brain shrinkage there's been, and we also do those neuropsychometric testing. So a lot of you do this neuropsychometrics because you're in the men's study, right? So you guys have been doing this for years, so you know this. So exercise is key. And then benzodiazepines are our enemy. That includes Klonopin, Valium, Ativan, all the fun ones. Xanax, yes, all the fun drugs. There are multiple published studies that look at these drugs, and the more people use the product and the higher the dose, the more likely the brain ages prematurely. And so, oh, you want those? Yeah, I don't know why my font shrunk. I got Xanax, I got Valium, I've got Ativan, Ambien. Sound familiar? Yeah, I deal with this every day. So the problem is it's based on total lifetime exposure. So it all depends on how many years you took the drug and how much of it you took. And so we've looked at this particularly with good data out of Canada, because in Canada, the government takes care of their people, not so much here, but in Canada they do. And so when you get healthcare in Canada, the government knows every single prescription you are picking up, and it's kept on file. So we can go up to Canada and we can say, we need 15,000 people with dementia, run the computer and tell us, what do they have in common? And within 20 minutes, the computer spits out, oh, these people all took high doses of Xanax for 20 years, right? So that was not welcome news to the drug companies in the United States. So those studies were repeated not once, not twice, but 3 times on the Canadian and on the UK system. And the data came back the same each time. Those drugs are risk factors for premature brain aging. They should be used as little as possible, as infrequently as possible, and at the lowest doses that people need, right? And, I don't have enough time in my day to argue with people about this, but, people will come in and say, oh, it's not so bad. I only use Xanax 5 nights a week. All right, do what you need to do, right? You got to live. I mean, if that's what you need to do to function, that's your issue. But if you want to talk about preventing aging brain, you really want to get rid of those drugs as much as humanly possible. The other thing that gets in the way, of course, is alcohol and tobacco. We've always known that. Alcohol is one of those few substances that gets across that blood-brain barrier. So That's why when you start to drink, within 20 minutes, you feel you've been drinking. It just directly goes into brain tissue. It gets across the barrier quickly, and so people will automatically know they've been drinking. That tells you that it's toxic for brain. And tobacco, of course, you're going to clog up those arteries and you're not going to get enough flow, vascular flow into brain. Central nervous system polypharmacy is a popular topic. I know our addiction medicine team works with this a lot. Our psychiatrists and behavioral health people work on this. But I will tell you that in my experience, it is not uncommon for people in their 80s to walk into my office and be on 5 different brain active medications. One for sleep, one for anxiety, one for depression, one for they don't know why the doctor gave it to them, and one for good measure. Central nervous system polypharmacy is a risk factor for aging prematurely in the brain. So I spend a lot of my time talking to people about, look at your med lists. Look at your list. The doctors mean well, but they tend to just keep adding things on and nobody tends to edit. So at least on an annual basis, people should have their primary care, whoever they go to the most, just look at that list and say, this drug went on 25 years ago when you were widowed and were very depressed. Now you're happy and things are great. Maybe we don't need 5 of these. So it's a good way to protect brain. So antiretroviral protection is, of course, very important. And you all know this because it's not just for brain, it's for every other part of our body. Compliance and monitoring of success of the antiretroviral therapy is critical. And I'm really so lucky to work with the HIV community because you guys are so medically literate. You're on it, you know it, you understand it. It really makes my job a lot easier and it's refreshing. A lot of people outside of this community are not particularly medically literate about what they're supposed to be doing. When we use antiretrovirals for a long time, we think that we change brain structure as well as having a good functional impact on the brain. We actually think that brain cells look healthier. We actually think there's less atrophy. We actually think there's less of that programmed cell death. So it's another reason that we urge people compliance. But I don't have to do a lot of urging. Guys get it. So sensory impairments are a disaster for brain. So everybody should get their hearing tested. People who need hearing aids should be wearing hearing aids because if the brain cannot see and it cannot hear, it cannot process. And once it loses that skill set, it doesn't always come back. So I tell people, I know they're uncomfortable. I know it's hard to walk around with these everywhere, but it's so important not to let your brain fall out of the practice of integrating multimodality inputs because you can't see or you can't hear. Cognitive engagement is like anything else. We don't have a specific program for any one brain, but we know that people who are engaged in an activity that requires thinking, so whether it's going to chorus, going to a book club, making new recipes, whatever it is, the more brains are in use, the less likely aging is premature. The worst thing brains can do is watch TV all day or do something passive. So we know it's engaging, but we do know that there is no truth to the fact that you must buy something, okay? So Luminosity likes to sell people these brain programs that are going to keep your brain smart. There's no proof. The proof is if you do something, your brain will stay healthy. But it has to be something you like to do. I get questions all the time about crossword puzzles. I don't know what an obsession with crossword puzzles is, but I can't stand them. So you can't force somebody to do an activity they don't like. That's not engaging, right? So it's meeting the person where they are. Everybody's got something they like to do, whether it's learning how to speak Spanish or learning a new card trick or learning a new game. But you don't have to buy things. That's just completely nonsensical. I will mention that if anyone here has not gotten their shingles vaccination, they should. The signal is increasingly strong that shingles vaccine reduces the risk of dementia. And we have looked at this now in at least 14 different studies. It doesn't matter which of the shingles vaccines has been used, but both of them are effective. And it seems to be simply because that, viral infection probably plays a role in that neuroinflammation. So by keeping shingles, HSV, EZV virus out of brain, we do better. So please spread the word. The shingles vaccine is actually, it's very good. All right, let's talk about environmental toxins because I talk about this all day, especially microplastics, okay? So last year at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, they took brains out of 500 people who passed away. They melted them down and they measured all the microplastic residual that was in there. And last year, the amount of microplastics was the highest in human history. They've been doing this for many years now. The amount of microplastic accumulation in brains was unbelievable. And then they looked at the data backwards and they said, okay, who's got the most microplastics? And the brains with the highest microplastics were the brains of people who had dementia. So we know that microplastics are an issue. So those plastic water bottles, glass and aluminum work well. They're recyclable too. They're planet friendly, particularly because they will tell you that this is PBA free and that this is safe. What they don't tell you is those statements are made in the ideal lab conditions and they are safe under perfect conditions. They are not safe in Palm Springs where they sit in my car in 120 degrees and bake, right? They are also not safe when they're filled with toxins like Diet Coke, where the acid works on the plastic all day long. So you store an acidic juice like lemonade in a plastic bottle in your refrigerator, you're getting microplastics. So what we tell people all the time is glass, aluminum, steel, ceramic, it works. Other sources of plastic in this world, those frickin' Tide Pods. My God, where do people think that goes? When that Tide Pod washes your clothes and breaks open and dissolves, that plastic is in the water, which then is on your clothing, which then you keep next to you and sweat into. Not good. And the other one that does this all the time is dishwasher pods. Oh, yeah, it's on your plates and silverware. Like, what are you eating off of? Not good. So the other basic things you cannot change. You cannot change the cheap plastic crap from China that's all over our cars. There's some things we're just stuck with. But I would get rid of any underarm deodorants or cosmetics that have any aluminum in them. So the products that they make by like Native are much safer, much less microplastic exposure. And then when you're going to eat, those little black takeout boxes, those sushi cartons are terrible, terrible, terrible. Particularly because I see people put them in the microwave. Yes, right. Speaking of microwaves, microwaves are deemed safe, but what they don't tell you is after you and your family have slammed the door 500 times, the seal is no longer tight. And so the microwave safety is no longer there. So if your microwave is not relatively new, when you put it on, you should step away and come back when the beeper goes off. I see people at work stand in front of it, frying their brain with microwaves because they really are not safe if the door is leaking. Of course, you could just get a new microwave because they're cheap, right? Well, cell phone use is probably not a great thing for people when it's too close to their ear for too long a time. But the data for aging and brain is not there with cell phones. The data for aging for brain and cell phone is there for pediatric brain tumors. Children should not be holding those phones to their ears while their brains are developing. It's probably not a great idea. So those are some of the things you can do. You can get rid of all of that black plastic stuff you have in your drawers, the little frying pan flip things and server pieces. No black plastics. Go back to the old-fashioned metal ones. They're a little harder to clean, but they're safer. And please, 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 no plastic cutting boards. No plastic cutting boards. That knife cuts right through that plastic and puts it right into your food, which then goes into your nice brain. So wood, stainless steel, glass, there's lots of options out there for cutting boards, but not plastic. My husband hates this speech, by the way, because it cost him a fortune. I threw out so many things in that house, right? I'm still finding more that is to go. So there's a lot of diets out there. There's the dietary approach to stop hypertension, the famous DASH diet. There's the famous MIND diet, which is Mediterranean based on top of DASH. And there's plant-based diet because we're not supposed to say vegan anymore. Vegans don't like that word. So it's plant-based. But any of these are neuroprotective. Many different practitioners focus on Mediterranean, some focus on MIND, some are very militant about plant-based. I don't think it matters. If you look at these diets, they really are overlapping. They're basically taking out lots of saturated fat and red meats. They're taking out processed foods. They're taking out alcohol. They're taking out excessive calories. And they're replacing it with fruits, vegetables, higher fiber diet. So I don't fuss with this. If I can get people to eat healthier, even if it's only 3 or 4 days a week, I'm still ahead of the game. So I don't think it's any specific diet. And you'll see they differ so minimally at not a thing. So where are we going in the future? We need improved access to healthcare. Okay, so here's a fact. We have 2 products now, intravenous infusions that we use for Alzheimer's disease that destroy beta amyloid plaque and set the clock back for 2 to 3 years for people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Less than 20% of American people who are eligible for the drug will receive it because we don't have universal health insurance and we don't have universal access to care. So we need in the future, for my focus for brain health, we do need improved access to care. We also need improved screening because now that we do have these biomarkers, we need to get more people into the office and more arms with needles to figure out who's at risk and who needs help. And we need better biomarkers. The ones that we have are a good start, but boy, wouldn't it be nice for HIV-related stuff to just be able to do it with, a new biomarker? I mean, that would be beautiful. And we need to emphasize these risk factors. I mean, individually, as we talked about tonight, changing our diets, changing our cookware, but I think in a public health sense as well. I mean, I think we do a disservice to the public that people don't know that dishwasher pods are probably bad for them. I don't think there's any warning on the box, And lastly, I know it's not popular in Washington right now, but we do need to continue to fund research because we want to look for new monoclonal antibody therapies. We want to look for new breakthroughs. We want to get more information. The National Brain Bank has been collecting brains at autopsy for some 30 years now. And this administration has shut the program down completely and thrown out the specimens. So it's an anti-science administration, and I don't want to go further than that. I don't want to spend the night on politics. But really, research matters. Research matters. Research saves lives. So support it, lobby for it, don't give up. And with that, I'm going to shut up because that's enough. I talk all day long. So I'm going to let this open up to questions because I love questions. So let's see. You got a mic for them?
Yeah, he's got one.
Oh, good.
Just to repeat the question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Is there such a thing as a brain cleanse or a detox?
Well, interesting. I don't think there's necessarily any specific product one has to do for a brain cleanse, but we notice that when people start eating a healthier diet and switch to an exercise program, all of a sudden structure looks better on the MRI, white matter looks healthier, and function improves. So I had a 92-year-old patient who was having tremendous neurocognitive decline. We convinced him to get on a treadmill as best he could for age. We convinced him to become a vegetarian, almost plant-based entirely. And here we are 2 years later, and he can play his grand piano again. You couldn't do it. So I don't have a specific drug to tell you to cleanse, but you can cleanse your body.
One of the things you didn't, one of the things you didn't discuss is marijuana. And this valley is complete.
Yeah, right. So the question is cannabis use and brains. The truth is, to this point, we don't have much data that it's a harmful product in the long term. So one of the reasons for that is because, it's a plant-based process, and we don't have great data that it's particularly a harmful issue long-term for brain. We know short-term, obviously, people who are stoned all the time need to get out from behind the wheel. So that's a big problem in this valley.
Could you talk briefly about the type of Alzheimer's where the person gets violent?
Well, unfortunately, in Alzheimer's disease, we have multiple subtypes. So there are subtypes where behavior and psychiatric components are massive. We technically call that behavioral variant Alzheimer's disease. And those patients are very, very difficult to treat because anything we do to try to reduce outbursts and behavioral processes, we also have the side effects of sedation and lethargy and less activity. So it's a tight balancing act. And I'm optimistic that we're going to come out with better drugs for that with time. We don't have them right now. Right now, we've got about 42 anti-Alzheimer's drugs in process, but we don't have funding for the FDA. So the drug companies create these drugs. They sound great, but the FDA can't approve them because they have no staffing and no budget. So this taking down the federal government has widespread consequences that I think most people don't know. Where are we going?
So first, thank you. Second, I have two questions in a statement. Question number one is, so I've been with my daughter in about 2 weeks. So what question should I ask her about? Because I have a family history of Alzheimer's. My mom died of it.
Okay.
So I feel I'm fine, but you never know. So how should I frame the question or just state that?
So the question is, in terms of family history of Alzheimer's, what should we do about testing?
And yeah, now should I guess I already answered my question. Like, just tell my doctor just what I said. I said, so
yeah,
can I get tested for?
Yeah, here's what I recommend. I recommend that you bring the topic up with your provider so that they can look at the total picture for any individual. But in general, today, I don't recommend genetic screening for people who are asymptomatic because we don't have interventions to offer. And I don't want to create anxiety and depression and panic when it's not necessary. Because even if you have both copies of ApoE4, you got a massive chance of Alzheimer's, but you got a 20% chance you don't get it. So 20% of those people are going to walk around anxious, depressed, stressed for no reason. So we generally say, because treatments have always been studied in symptomatic people, even early symptomatic, those folks should be tested. But right now, I wouldn't recommend an asymptomatic individual necessarily just getting tested.
Second question is, how do microplastics get into your brain? You've been saying about the blade.
Yeah, you would think that blood-brain barrier would work 100%, and it probably does for most things, but these are really nasty toxic chemicals, often benzene-based. And benzenes, as you know, can cross anything like alcohol. So there are some very nasty chemicals out there, and it is likely that many of them have a way of sneaking into brain.
And the last thing I want to say is, I'm sober, and when I was in rehab, one of the issues came up is pot. And when people continue to use it, and also for helping sleep, and they recommend you do not use it because you become dependent upon it,
Mhm.
and it throws off your internal clock, so you'll get used to having the dose to help.
Sure.
keep it,
Sure.
So just
Sure.
want to share that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm certainly not advocating for cannabis here. But in fairness to cannabis, I do have to say we don't really have data that it's a long-term brain problem. We may have that data at some point, but not.
That's true of all sleep aids.
Yeah, all sleep aids cause dependency and are habituating, and none of them work for long.
Okay, ethanol is a plant-based
Yeah,
material.
right.
Now, I have a friend who's, I don't know if I could say addicted, but he has to have this glass of Cabernet with
Right.
I can sympathize with. But what is the actual mechanism?
Well, I can give you the National Institute of Aging guideline for alcohol. For adult males, 4 beverages per week is considered brain safe. So a beverage is defined as a 4-ounce glass of wine, 1 can of beer, 1 bottle of beer, or 2-ounce pour of a spirit. For women, it's 3 per week. So most folks that I see in the office enjoy their beverages, particularly in this city. It's a drinking town. So I think at least if we give them that guideline, it gives them at least a fallback position, right? Because folks don't like it when you tell them abstinence. It doesn't go over easily, right? So we do have data, and again, 4 per week for men, 3 per week for women. I will tell you a humorous story that I said that one day, and my patient said, "Well, I did my whole week in one day."
Yeah.
So I said, "Well, I guess that happens."
Tony, gabapentin, Benadryl. What are, I'm hearing all the time, don't take those, they're bad for seniors, bad. for
Right.
seniors.
Right.
And on the flip side, Prevagen and the other.
Oh, good. I got a Prevagen
Yeah.
question. That's good. That's good. I got a Prevagen question because Prevagen gets a lot of TV time, and that comes up a lot. There is no clinical data that Prevagen works. None, 0, nothing. But because it is an over-the-counter, it is not FDA supervised or approved. So the government says, let the buyer beware. If you want to buy it, that's your business. So they have lots of testimonials from famous people who say now they're brilliant. But honestly, if you look at the clinical data, Prevagen has no data that it works, none at all. Going back to gabapentin and Benadryl, I don't have data that they're a problem in terms of brain aging in my section, but here's the scoop. The reason you hear seniors shouldn't take them is because they significantly increase fall risk. And the #1 cause of death after 80 is a fall. So you don't want people taking Benadryl or gabapentin in their 80s or 90s. need. Make sense?
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Would you recommend organic foods in diet?
Well, I think if I could trust that everything they sold me was organic, I would. I'm careful about that recommendation. They did a wonderful study in New York where they went to 20 high-end supermarkets and bought organic salmon and tested it and found out that, guess what? Somebody at the distributor had switched the boxes by mistake, and we were paying a lot of money for inorganic. That being said, yeah, I think that the more likely you will have fewer pesticides in your dish if you are buying something that's organic. But there is a caveat. Apricots, strawberries, and peaches, you should only buy organic. There is absolutely no way to get pesticide out of the fuzz. So even my mother's old-fashioned soaking them in water, and it doesn't work. So if you only have a limited budget for organic food, I would say when it comes to strawberries, peaches, and apricots, organic.
Another question is about a condition called binocular vision dysfunction related to HIV and HAC. You know anything about that?
I would defer that to either our ophthalmology colleagues or our neuro-ophthalmologists, to be fair. Not something I do.
Are there issues as it relates to balance, falling as we age, living with HIV and meds that we're on? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, there's no doubt that balance is a diminishing success as you get older. I'm very fond now of touching things while I'm going places. Balance skills definitely decline with age. They decline not just in HIV, but with any chronic disease more rapidly. And the brain spends a lot of energy making us walk on 2 feet. Nobody else does, only humans. So anything that affects brain impairs gait and balance. So those are, if you ever come to our office, you ever see a neurologist, you're going to take my walk of shame down the hall. Because we can see so much about brain in the pattern of how people balance and walk and turn. I can almost diagnose many items, stroke, Parkinson's, all sorts of things, just watching people walk. But what you can do, balance can be learned. You were not born learning, you didn't know how to ride a bicycle, somebody knew, because you had to learn the balance. So if you take yoga or Tai Chi or Pilates or balance classes, you can improve and stabilize balance, although it will get worse as we age. There's no doubt about it. Don't get old.
You haven't mentioned stimulants such as coffee.
Yeah, there's actually data that a small amount of coffee or tea is actually neuroprotective because there's so many antioxidants in there in addition to just caffeination. So coffee is not really considered a problem for aging brain. So you can enjoy your Starbucks tomorrow. You're off the hook.
Diet Coke.
All right, well, let's Diet Coke. Come on. Yeah. Anything that's manufactured and has the word diet in the title, I would be very concerned. Yeah. But no, we don't have bad data on coffee. So many antioxidants in there. So there's if you look at like public health data, people who drink a lot of coffee have lower rates of Parkinson's disease. Yeah. Who knew? Anything else? Yep. Move on. Go ahead. Sure.
You mentioned non-symptomatic people not getting
Right.
Speaking of that test, genetic testing, what about the
Hold it closer. It's not.
that word?
Yeah, and I'll repeat the questions. That's okay.
Yeah. The other serum test that you mentioned for somebody with mild memory loss.
Yes. So the question is again about serum biomarkers. And again, not recommended for people who have no symptoms. But if someone has cognitive symptoms, all of those biomarkers in combination give us a much better picture of what's the problem here, what can be offered, what should be offered. So we do them.
And can both of those tests be ordered by your primary care physician?
Oh, yeah, look, here's the deal. I'll be nice. Yes, primary care doctors can order whatever they want. The problem is, will they know what to do with the results and how to counsel you when the results come back? So, I mean, maybe it's self-serving of me, but I tend to think it's probably best to have tests with people who are going to be able to help you when those results come in. Not just serum tests for HIV, for biomarkers for Alzheimer's. I mean, even, you know, if you have a hematology problem or an oncology problem or a kidney issue, it's probably best to have a specialist so that when those results come back, somebody can put them in context for you. Because I see sometimes in primary care, things do get ordered, but when results come back, there's panic because they're not really sure. I don't know what to tell the patient. It's just your test is bad. Right? So
How do you know if, like, you're losing your mind, basically? I forget everything, and it gets worse and worse. And then is there some kind of a measure or some kind of a thing going, is this too quick? Is this not?
yeah, I think that's where our neuropsychologists come in, doing those multiple domain tests for you, because those can be followed objectively over time. And they're also, when we do neuropsychometric testing, it is selected for you as an individual. The tests that we select are based on your education level, your occupation, your socioeconomic status, your gender, your age. So it's very specific profile that comes out. The Medicare will pay for that every 12 to 24 months. And that is a really objective way to say, you're just getting older, these are okay. Or it's the same as it was 2 years ago, you're doing great. Or it got better because you became a vegan or a plant-based diet person. Excuse me. Apologies to the vegans in the audience. Oh, yeah.
Is there any correlation at all with valley fever with any of this?
Coccidioidomycosis valley fever question. Only in the fact that exposure to coccidioidomycosis, or what you call valley fever, causes a meningitis and potentially an encephalitis. Anytime you've got a meningitis or an encephalitis, you by definition have had brain injury, and therefore later in life, you've lost some of your threshold, right? You take down capacity. That's why we don't like multiple concussions, multiple strokes, multiple seizures, meningitis. We don't like anything getting near our brain. Yes. So there would be a correlation there. We're good? Thanks
so much.
You're so welcome. Nice to be here. Thank you. You just walk away.
Okay. Sorry, I got you to pop the water. So thank you again. And so a couple of announcements. Next month's program will be on STIs in older adults, so a sex talk with Sergio Luna. And, we're talking about, neurological health and research. We're really fortunate in this region to have UCSD's NeuroBehavioral Research Program. So they do research, they have studies, check out their website. If you're thinking you're having problems, if you can't get in to see Dr. Sy, they will often do screening for free and let you know what your research options are for the studies they have. So if you need that information, we have links on our website. Ask me. It's a great resource that we have. Fortunate to have here. Anything else? 15 sandwiches. And we have 15 sandwiches left over. So if you want to take one home for tomorrow, help yourself. Thank you.